Welcome to another exciting, entertaining, educational, enticing episode of the Fueling Station. I'm Ed Kammerer with my Pod-troleum brother, Jonathan Stong.
Hello.
We are so happy to be recording another episode. So, Jonathan, this is actually a little different for us. For the first time, most of our episodes we record either on a trade show floor. We've recorded on the factory floor. We've recorded at our distributor seminars, kind of out in front of the people. But now I'm feeling this is actually turning into a real podcast because I'm actually sitting in a podcast studio, recording this episode for the first time in a studio. We've got you, kind of blown in remotely, but I'm here at the Dean Houston Studios in beautiful Cincinnati, Ohio. Actually, technically, I guess we're across the river in Covington, but looking out the window, I see the beautiful Cincinnati skyline. I see Paycor Stadium, home of the Cincinnati Bengals. I see the old Three River Stadium, or the Great American Ballpark, home of the Cincinnati Reds. And, looking at that football stadium reminds me, we're getting close to football season. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe your Philadelphia Eagles come in this fall and play my Cincinnati Bengals. What do you think about that?
I think I'm extremely excited. I think you and I talked about that game just a couple weeks ago when we were together last. And yes, I'm ready for football. Yes, I'm ready for the Eagles to play. And coming to Cincinnati, I don't know. You guys have a great team. You have a great fan base. I just hope for a great game. I would like to see Green win, but we'll see what happens because you've got a strong offense and, of course, a prestigious defense right now. So let's see what happens.
So this is what I'm thinking, Jonathan. I foresee an episode of the Fueling Station being recorded at the Paul Brown Stadium tailgate lot. What do you think about that?
I love it. I'll fly in first thing Sunday morning. I think it's an afternoon game, or I'll come in Saturday. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's all for the people. So
I know that would definitely be a first in the petroleum industry, is a podcast recorded at a football tailgate.
I think Eddie, you have great ideas.
I'm ready. We're all about, breaking barriers and doing things different than anybody else. Absolutely. But so speaking about doing things different than everybody else, we try and base these on, feedback that we get from other episodes that we've talked about, people in the industry. I get people ask me all the time, hey, why don't you do an episode on this? Hey, why don't you do an episode on that? And we touched on this, I believe, 2 seasons ago, just a very small piece of it. But really a question that I still get asked a lot is about diesel exhaust fluid, DEF. It's still a big topic of conversation in our industry. This is a fluid, obviously it's different from gasoline and diesel, but it's still a critical fluid in our industry that I think a lot of people still have questions about.
There are certain things that installers and manufacturers need to keep in mind when designing these systems, installing these systems, and maintaining them through the life of the station. So that's exactly
Absolutely.
right.
So Jonathan, as I wanted to do a DEF episode, and there was only one guy I could think of that we need to bring in and talk to. In my opinion, he is the foremost expert of DEF in our industry. I'm here with none other than my good friend, Steve Cox from KleerBlue. Steve, how you doing, buddy?
Great. Doing great. Thank you guys so much for inviting me.
Steve, so we've known each other, almost 30 years, I think, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So I couldn't think of a better person to bring in to talk about DEF than Steve Cox. He eats, breathes, sleeps, and like I said, he's the national sales manager. So he's kind of a one-man show when it comes to selling and designing these DEF systems. We'll jump right into it. So Steve, again, for people that don't know, just a quick, layman's explanation. What is DEF, and where and how is it used in our industry?
Okay. Well, DEF's a non-toxic fluid. It's comprised of 32.5% automotive grade urea, and it has a deionized water content of 67.5%. And it's used in the selective catalytic reduction technology that's been found on diesel engines since 2010. And SCR is an emissions system. It's the hot exhaust gases that leave the engine flow into the SCR system, and the DEF is injected into that stream, and it goes across the catalyst in the catalytic reduction process. So The chemical reaction kind of occurs where the nitrous oxides converted into nitrogen, water, and then small amounts of carbon dioxide, in which, those are the natural components of what we breathe each day. So that's the basic process of diesel exhaust fluid. Selective catalytic reduction, which is what's found in the trucks, that's it reduces the level. It's necessary to reduce the levels of the NOx, and it uses the ammonia. We've spoken about that beforehand, as a reductive agent. What's really neat about SCR, it's the most cost-effective and efficient technology available to help eliminate emissions with a diesel engine. And so since 2010, all heavy-duty trucks have pretty much used SCR technology to comply with the EPA emissions, which is 90% emissions reduction on the greenhouse gas emissions that come out of it. So
Gotcha. So what DEF does, it just makes the exhaust that comes out of the diesel engines cleaner. So, those of us in the industry, we know that, DEF, it really requires, special equipment, in storing, in handling, and transporting and dispensing. So what makes DEF unique, and why is it important, or why do you have to have special materials that come in contact with the DEF?
Well, it's the ISO standards. The DEF itself is under an ISO standard of ISO 22241-1, and the handling requirements, which you would find in RP 1100 from PEI, are in 22241-3. And
I told you this guy knew everything about DEF.
I was going to say, are we speaking science or English? What are we doing here?
No, but I just kind of know those things. And then the storage requirements, what happens to DEF is, of course, it freezes at 12 degrees. On a semi-truck, I believe the rule was it can run for 45 minutes while it's frozen. Let's say they're in a cold environment and it's going to freeze. So the heater in the truck, the heater in the tank will heat the DEF up in that truck. And during that time, they might have some emissions that will be higher than the standard, but it'll melt and go back to a liquid form. So as it becomes a liquid again, the characteristics of the DEF is not affected, okay? So that requires the heaters in the DEF tanks on the vehicles, but it also requires for storage and dispensing for us in cold environments to have insulation and heat tracing on above ground solutions or dispensers or tanks and piping.
Those of us in the industry, we know that you can't use the same type of equipment, whether it's the pipe, whether it's the tank, overfill, all the types of things that we use for diesel and gasoline is completely different for DEF, correct?
Yes. And I've had many people say they want to reuse their existing diesel tank, kerosene tank, and some of them have them lined. Not sure how well that works, but yes, you're not supposed to reuse products, containers, storage tanks, even poly tanks that stored another product or any kind of a product. It has to be virgin. It has to be brand new, never touched by another product.
So why is that? There's certain materials, is it because the DEF can be contaminated? Is that the issue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, I can't remember. I think it's 0.1 teaspoon of nickel or copper or something like that, or any kind of materials that are not recommended or not on the recommendation list for diesel exhaust fluid. In a truckload or 4,800 gallons of DEF on a load being delivered, 1.1 teaspoon will contaminate the whole load.
Wow, that's not good.
It has to be stainless steel, polypropylene, polyethylene kind of materials, or like with your own products, the piping DEF compatible. It's been tested to ISO 22241-3.
So what are the big no-no materials? I know aluminum is one of them, right?
Yes, carbon steel, aluminum, nickel, mild irons, any kind of alloys like magnesium, non-ferrous, like we talked about. You said zinc, lead, copper.
So a lot of things we see in the typical petroleum, valves and fittings and those types of things.
Yes.
So what about dispensing? I mean, can you just use a regular dispenser, or these require special dispensers?
Require the special dispensers, all stainless steel materials, meters, solenoid valves, plumbing. Hoses have to be DEF compatible. Pretty much anything, meters, filter housing, even the filter cartridge has to be DEF compatible.
So it's not that that liquid is corrosive to those types of materials. It's those materials can contaminate the DEF
Yes.
easily. Yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Steve, if I can interject here, one of the things that we talk about are these connections. So again, when talking about ferrous materials, non-ferrous materials, composite materials for the piping and so on and so forth. Also in the RP, it talks about, parallel threads, British threads, using O-rings versus maybe a mashed thread. Is that because they're also concerned with maybe the pipe dope maybe not being compatible, getting inside of there, it weeping, it crystallizing? I see a lot of reference to parallel threads and straight threads. Can you kind of, add to that?
Well, Jonathan, when we first started, I recall even with your nozzles, they were BSPP thread. A lot of that came from the European model, I believe.
Yeah.
And it might be because, and I'm not for sure, I'm just gonna ad lib here a little bit, but DEF thread sealant, the thread sealant's compatible with DEF, may not have been tested at that time. Okay. And there were some anomalies and all that too, and a lot of them leaked the thread sealants. And there's specific, thread sealants that have to be ISO. They have to go through the certification process and be approved. But we're using NPT threads.
And when you're doing the NPT, like we're saying, it's probably a stainless, right?
Yes.
And
Or
then you're
polypropylene
or poly.
poly.
But if we're dealing with an application where it's an NPT stainless and it's a female NPT, something we've always talked about on the retail fueling side is the potential for those products to seize or to gall. I guess it's not really a big deal when you're talking about DEF. Is that right?
No, we haven't seen that too much, I don't believe, no.
Okay,
But,
that's
the problem with DEF is that it's highly susceptible to creep and it'll leak, and that's why you see crystallization when it hits the air. You'll see, crystals like salt crystals on the ground or whatever, right? So, and like you said earlier, it's not hazardous, it's non-flammable. So mostly you rinse off. But I've seen huge amounts kill grass, of course, but that's because it wasn't rinsed, away with water.
One thing I've always wondered, here in the US, we call it DEF, but over there they call it AdBlue. And, you even have the word blue in your company name, KleerBlue. Where does blue come from in this whole DEF world?
I'm taking a stab at it and I'm saying blue skies.
Blue skies? Okay.
No ozone.
Okay.
I'm taking a stab because I've never been asked that question and I'm not sure I know, but I
Boy,
believe
that's
the thing.
these are the hard-hitting questions you
Yes.
can expect from us here at the fueling station.
what you're saying it right, Ed. This migrated from Europe, but we're seeing more and more applications here in the States. And one of the things, Steve, you said was about above ground piping. We talk about two different styles of systems, whether it's a recirculating system or whether it's one with a trace tape. And we're finding more and more USTs using recirculating systems and less AST, less and less totes, which is really what started in the States. When you're out there seeing it, promoting the best practices and applications and putting together systems for people, are you promoting one versus the other? Are you saying one's better than the other? Recirculating, trace tape? Is it regionally based? Is it customer based? What do you think really determines how these individuals are designing these systems?
I think it's more so customer based and PEI sales contractor based personally. We've done many research systems. We are 100% AST above ground storage tanks, whether they be a brayer poly, insulated and heated poly, or an enclosure type of solution that's been insulated and heated as well.
So let's here's your chance, your shameless plug. Let's talk a little bit about what KleerBlue does. What are you guys known for? What are the type of systems that you guys put together? And why is it important to have a complete, what we call an integrated or an engineered system, at these stations, or in whether it's commercial or retail fueling, where diesel trucks are being refilled with DEF?
Well, we start with a design that incorporates, when you start with a poly tanks move. They're not like a fiberglass tank or a steel tank or a stainless steel tank. They move in and out. So you have to take that into your design when you're you're saying this design engineered, and you have to keep in mind they expand out when product goes in, and they come back in when product goes out. They come down and up with product levels too. So you have to take that movement into consideration with your plumbing and how that affects the plumbing and your flex connectors and all those kinds of things. That's a basic engineering. Then we make our own dispenser for retail and fleet and commercial. We make our own enclosures to put tanks in that are insulated and heated, and they can have hose reels in them. We've made them so they can feed the DEF day tanks on diesel generator sets, making sea containers for supplying DEF day tanks on generators. There's so many different options. But what it's really gotten into, of course, is the DEF blending systems for customers. They're making their own DEF. And so they're bringing in a 50% liquid urea, automotive grade urea, and they're bringing it in and they're diluting it down to 32.5%. So at a factory or a facility, a building, and then when they're done with that, they can bottle it in jugs or they can take it out to their customers.
So you guys are a true turnkey operation when it comes to DEF,
Yes.
everywhere from the designing of the system to the manufacturing of the system.
We do DEF distributor tanks and pumping systems. We transload rail cars at high flow. We've done projects up on the North Slope of Alaska. Just so many different, you get involved in so many different whatever applications. It's just incredible. You know, the train engines require DEF. I've done many of those applications where you're filling a train and you're filling it at 25 gallons a minute. You have custom nozzles. You're getting involved in off-road equipment, mining equipment. Mining equipment requires purity and clarity of the DEF and a tight fit, quick disconnect kind of a nozzle situation.
Which kind of leads me in, to the next topic of conversation is, the future. Where is this going? We hear a lot of things about, clean fuels, alternative fuels, certainly electricity or EVs and electric vehicle. What's your take on the future of DEF and diesel? Is it going anywhere?
Well, it's interesting in that fact that the DEF injection rate in 2010 was 2% or 2 gallons for every 100 gallons of diesel fuel consumed by the semi truck, by a Class 8 truck. 2017, that went up to 5%. So for every 100 gallons of diesel fuel. Currently, it's about 5.5%. And in 2027 is the new emission standard by the EPA. And that's going to make it, they need to reduce it by 99%, the emissions that come out of a truck. So we're going to have 2 SCR systems in a truck instead of just one they're looking at. And it'll be a cylinder deactivation too to help make the truck more efficient too, okay? And so we're looking at this growth, continued growth in the injection rate and also the volume of the tank storage. You're looking at DEF right now, I think it's 1.2 billion gallons in the North American market. It's going to be something like, it's going to, down in the future, it's like 2035, I think, or something like that. It's going to level out at about 1.75 and it might start to head down.
Gotcha.
Okay. As the other technologies come into play a little bit. Okay.
If we're talking about vehicles that require the DEF and is only a small percentage of DEF per total volumes of diesel, what if I don't use DEF when I'm supposed to in my truck? Is it going to have a detriment to the engine, or is it just more organic compounds displaced into the environment? Is it going to have an adverse effect on the performance of the vehicle?
If your tank runs out of DEF, you derate in a Class 8. I've never looked into it, but I'm pretty sure that for a pickup truck like an F-250 with diesel, things like that are going to be the same thing. You're going to derate and you have to pull over on the side of the road.
Okay.
You need DEF in the tank.
Sounds like DEF's not going anywhere. If anything, there's going to be a larger demand for it as the emission standard requires more injection. And we talked about this at lunch as well. Actually, the DEF engines also run more efficiently. They get better gas mileage because they can run, I don't want to say the word dirtier, but they can run more effectively. The tale of story here is, if you're a petroleum distributor, if you're a contractor, certainly us as a manufacturer, DEF is something you're still going to want to be involved in and stay up to speed on.
I think the education that the PEI members should understand is that the size of the tanks needs to be quite larger because of the future volume increase. And a truckload of DEF in most scenarios is 5,200 gallons. So you should be hitting, if a customer is going to be going through a truckload a month, they need a truckload tank.
Yeah.
And they need bigger possibly.
So speaking of that, people in our PEI industry, where can people go to get more information on the recommended practices of handling DEF? I have a feeling there's probably a document out there somewhere floating around.
Jonathan?
That's it. Just like you were saying earlier, RP 1100, great document. I've read it multiple times. I know that our engineers and product management teams in the house, that's one of the first things they go through is they read all the RPs. But there's a lot of great information in this document.
And I think a lot of people don't, focus on the purity. And you brought that up a little earlier, but purity is so important in this because that injection point on the truck, when it's injecting, it's so small, it's minute. And any kind of a dirt piece or anything that gets into that line, the injector can't work. Mm-hmm. And that is so important. I'm seeing people refill jugs. They'll take a jug and they'll use a tote and refill the jug. No, DEF should go from the tote to a tote pump to a nozzle to the DEF vehicle. DEF should go from a bulk storage tank, underground, above ground, to a pump to the nozzle. I see so many bad things going on in our industry here in 15 years into it. And it's really, really a concern to many of us. The DEF distributors, the DEF suppliers, we're all kind of concerned when we see these things going on.
Steve, this is all education, right? It's educating your partners, your teammates, customer base. When we put together DEF systems, we certify or we attest. Do you do anything special to help educate your customers about how to be efficient and how to make sure these systems do go properly together and how to maintain these systems?
I really do try to be the value-added asset in my sale process. I've learned that years ago. You're supposed to be an unpaid consultant to your customer. You want to guide them to the best. And do you really understand the DEF injection rate and what it's going to do, and what percentage of your fleet has SCR? What percentage, if it's what percentage are newer, what percentage are older? Are you looking at just you got to know these things and talk to customers.
With that, we'll kind of wrap it up here. So I think, a couple key takeaways. Obviously, our PEI distributors, need to continue to be informed on DEF. It's not going away. A great place to find that information is RP 1100, which they can get from PEI. A great document, great source. They don't call it recommended practices for nothing. And then certainly, if they want to reach out, KleerBlue. You guys do a great job. Really the experts here in the industry as far as putting together systems, whether they're portable systems, whether they're permanent systems. So yeah, it was a great conversation. I appreciate you, having on. You're going to say something? You got some more information for us?
I'd like to add some websites that are interesting for the industry to learn more about the future of, propulsion, diesel, battery, whatever, hydrogen. Sources like enginetechforum.org, transportationenergy.org, and the API.org website. You search for the diesel exhaust fluid portion there, okay? But those three websites are just valuable tools.
So we'll leave with one last tidbit. Speaking of websites, if you're going to go back to YouTube and search some Ohio University Bobcat football footage back from the early to mid 1980s. So Jonathan, did you know that our very own Steve Cox was the Bobcat mascot for Ohio University? He actually wore the Bobcat uniform.
I can see it in his smile.
He was Rufus. Those of you in the MAC, Ohio University, the Bobcat is Rufus. Our very own Steve Cox was Rufus.
Amazing.
Back in the early 1980s. So I was like,
you're dating me now.
I think that's a great little trinket there. I think that's awesome that you were a D1 college mascot. So with that, hey, Jonathan, we always like to make this entertaining. If you didn't learn anything about DEF, you learned that Steve Cox was a former Bobcat mascot. So that was worth the listen right there. So, hey, Steve, we really appreciate you stopping by. We're going to wrap up another episode of The Fueling Station. Again, you can find us any place that you get your podcasts. And with that, we appreciate you listening as always. I'm Ed Kammerer.
I'm Jonathan Stong.
And what are we known as, Jonathan?
The Pod-troleum Guys.
Pod-troleum Guys. Thanks for listening, everyone.